There is a city on the Black Sea coast where the streets are wide and sun-bleached, where trees line the boulevards in even rows, and the old stone buildings carry the memory of czars and sailors and merchants from a dozen different worlds. A city that has always loved itself, its opera house, its famous staircase, its salt air and its noise. But beneath all of it, beneath the cafes and the market squares and the apartment blocks and the old churches, there is something else. Something the city grew over and largely forgot and never fully understood. The catacombs of Odessa are not like other underground systems. They are not a single network with a clear beginning and a known end. They are not the product of one empire or one era or one deliberate decision. They are older than the city itself in some sections and still being discovered in others. Some researchers estimate the total length of the tunnels at over 2,000 kilometers. Others put the figure higher. No one has mapped the entire system. No one has walked every passage. And despite more than a century of exploration, there are sections that have never been documented, corridors that dead-end into collapsed rock, and chambers that were sealed not by accident, but by intention. The city of Odessa was built on limestone, soft stone, the kind that splits clean when you know where to strike it. And when the city was going up in the 18th and 19th centuries, no one was shipping stone in from somewhere else. They cut it from below. Builders drove their picks down through the earth, pulled blocks of limestone out in great rectangular slabs, and stacked those blocks into the walls and facades you see standing today. Every old building in Odessa was, in some sense, pulled out of the ground it now stands on. What was left behind were the quarries. Long, low corridors running in rough parallel lines, the occasional widened chamber where two cuts crossed, ceilings that barely cleared a man's head. In the beginning, there was nothing mysterious about any of it. This was simply how you built things here. You took the stone where you found it and you left the holes behind. But Odessa grew faster than almost anyone had planned for. By the mid-19th century, it had become one of the most important port cities in the entire Russian Empire. Cosmopolitan, crowded, rich in some quarters and desperate in others, full of people from across Europe and the Middle East who had arrived chasing trade or fleeing something. As the city pushed outward and upward, the old quarry tunnels beneath it were simply swallowed by the expansion. New passages were cut to connect old ones. Some were extended for drainage. Others became informal roads for people who had reasons to avoid the streets above. And a network of tunnels running beneath a growing city with dozens of entrances and no central authority keeping count becomes very quickly a place where the surface world loses its grip. In the 18th century, the tunnels were found useful by smugglers. The Black Sea coast had always been rich with goods, worth moving without documentation. Wine, salt, weapons, contraband from the docks. The limestone corridors that angled toward the port were particularly valuable. You could enter a tunnel far inland and emerge near the waterfront, having moved your cargo without once crossing a lit street or passing a guard post. Local accounts claim that some of these operations were impressively organized, that specific routes were controlled by specific groups, that there were underground meeting points where arrangements were made by torchlight, that certain sections had permanent lookouts. Whether every detail of these accounts is accurate is hard to say with certainty. They come from memoir, from oral tradition, from early 20th century journalism that was not always rigorous about what it verified. But the physical evidence found in more recent decades is consistent with the broad picture. Explorers have documented storage niches cut deliberately into corridor walls, iron rings bolted into the limestone at regular intervals, sections of tunnel that appear to have been widened not by water erosion but by tools, and widened specifically to allow the movement of large containers. The stone remembers. That is one of the stranger qualities of Odessa's underground. In the right conditions, dry, away from groundwater, insulated from temperature swings. Limestone preserves detail in a way that can feel almost wrong. A chisel mark from 1820 can look almost fresh. A carved symbol can still hold its edges sharp enough to catch a light. This has made certain sections of the tunnels genuinely difficult to date, because old damage and new damage look remarkably similar in the dark. Above ground, the city kept transforming. Revolutions arrived, wars passed through, occupations came and left their marks. Through all of it, the catacombs absorbed history in their own way, not recording it exactly, but holding it. During the Second World War, the tunnels became something that no quarry worker from the previous century could have imagined. When German and Romanian forces occupied Odessa in the autumn of 1941, a group of Soviet partisans went underground, not as a temporary measure, as a sustained strategy. They brought weapons down, food, medical supplies, a printing press, and they stayed, living in the tunnels through the winter and into 1942, running operations against the occupation from corridors that the occupying forces above could not map and could not safely follow. The partisan fighters knew sections of the network that had never appeared on any official survey. Some of that knowledge had come down through families, some through the criminal networks of the pre-war city, which had maintained their own private understanding of which routes went where. The tunnels were never a secret to the people who had always used them, only to the people who thought they could manage a city from above. What those fighters endured in the limestone corridors is difficult to hold in the mind for long. Cold that was persistent and total. Water that dripped from the ceiling and pooled on the floor and seeped through clothing. Ventilation that was always insufficient. Light that had to be conserved to the point where darkness became the default state rather than the exception. They moved through passages where the ceiling pressed down to shoulder height, where the walls narrowed to the width of a single person turned sideways, where a wrong turn could become a long and frightening problem. And yet the operation functioned. Leaflets printed underground were found on the streets above. Sabotage missions were coordinated from below. The occupation command reportedly tried multiple times to locate the partisan base and failed each time. A memorial now stands at one of the known entrances, near the village of Nerubaiska, outside the city. A section of the tunnels there has been preserved as a museum. You can walk it, the low stone ceiling, the preserved equipment along the walls, the narrow sleeping areas. It gives an impression of the conditions. It does not fully communicate what months in that darkness actually cost. But the partisan history is only one layer, and the story does not stop in 1944. After the war, the tunnels returned to the margins of official life. The Soviet authorities were, at various points, genuinely uncomfortable with what existed beneath one of their major port cities. A tunnel network extending far beyond any existing map was not something a centralized administration could feel easy about. There were periodic efforts to seal known entrances, to collapse specific passages, to produce something approaching a complete survey. None of it worked. The system was simply too old, too branching, too thoroughly woven into the ground beneath the city. For every entrance sealed, several others remained unknown to whoever had done the sealing, and so the catacombs settled into a kind of parallel life. Officially restricted, officially documented in fragments, but in reality used by successive generations who had no interest in official permission. Smugglers again, in the post-war black market years. Later, urban explorers who developed their own culture around mapping and moving through underground spaces. Teenagers, occasional criminal operations that needed somewhere to keep things out of sight. Some passages near the port district, accessed by diggers in the 1990s, showed signs of use that were clearly not wartime relics. Discarded equipment, fresh tool marks, containers that did not belong to any previous century. The catacombs are not simply a historical artifact. In certain sections, they have functioned as an active space well into living memory. The community of urban explorers that developed in Odessa in the late Soviet and early post-Soviet period is one of the more interesting chapters in the tunnel's modern history. These were mostly young people who built detailed knowledge of the system through direct exploration, sharing information informally between trusted people, maintaining their own rough maps, developing a culture that existed entirely outside anything official. Some of them spent hundreds of hours underground. A few accessed sections that no archaeologist or historian has formally documented. Their accumulated maps suggest a system considerably more complex than any government survey has acknowledged. But those maps also cannot be taken as definitive, because the catacombs are dangerous, not in a vague theoretical way, but in a specific and documented one. People have died in these tunnels. Some became lost and could not find their way out before exhaustion and dehydration settled the question. Others entered sections where the limestone ceiling had been weakened by age or by construction directly above, and the ceiling came down. There are passages where the floor has eroded into an underground stream, and what looks like solid ground is not solid and is not ground. In some areas, the air has been described by explorers as thin or fouled, possibly from gas accumulation in chambers that had been sealed for a long time. Odessa's emergency services have carried out rescues in the tunnels. They have also recovered bodies. This is the part of the story that resists romanticizing. A wrong turn in the Odesa Catacombs with a failing light in a section that no one above knows you entered is a situation with a narrow margin. The darkness down there is the kind that does not adjust to. It is simply complete, and yet people keep going down. Some explorers have reported finding chambers that had been sealed deliberately, not collapsed by structural failure, but blocked by someone who placed rubble in the opening with purpose and intention. What those chambers contained when they were sealed is in most cases unknown. Some were empty when accessed. Others held old storage, ceramic vessels, corroded metal, material that suggested a pre-Soviet origin. A few accounts describe spaces that bore signs of sustained habitation, not just storage, features that implied sleeping, eating, living in the dark over an extended period. Whether those spaces date from the partisan years, from earlier criminal networks, or from something older is often genuinely unclear. The darkness preserves and obscures simultaneously. You can find something and still not know what you have found. There is a layer of this story that involves the geology itself, and it matters because it changes how you understand what is happening above ground as much as below. Odessa has struggled for well over a century with ground subsidence. Buildings sink, roads crack, foundations shift in ways that puzzled engineers until the underground system was better understood. In certain districts, the limestone has been quarried so thoroughly that the structural support beneath entire blocks is marginal at best. There have been sinkholes in Odessa, real ones, documented ones, cases where the ground opened and swallowed a section of street, a courtyard, part of a building, because the rock below had been hollowed by old extraction or eaten away by water running along tunnel edges. The city above is, in places, thinner than it appears from street level. This is not widely discussed. The streets are full, the cafes are busy, the staircase draws tourists who stand at the top and look out over the harbor without knowing that the ground beneath the old city is threaded with passages and chambers and hollow spaces that no complete map has ever captured. But the geological surveys exist, the subsidence records exist, and the relationship between the living city and the hollow ground beneath it is, in a practical engineering sense, still unresolved. Modern Odessa has made efforts to address the problem. Infrastructure work over recent decades has involved both mapping and reinforcing sections of the underground near high-density areas. Some of the most structurally compromised passages near the city center have reportedly been backfilled deliberately to reduce the risk of surface collapse. What this means for what was physically inside those sections, whether anything of archaeological value was buried back into rock in the process, is not clearly documented in publicly available records. There is something both practical and quietly sad about that. Making the city safer above necessarily means altering or destroying what is below. History compressed back into stone. The parts that remain are still extensive. The museum section near Nerubaiska gives a controlled but genuinely atmospheric introduction to what the tunnels feel like. The ceiling pressing down, the smell of old limestone and damp earth, the way sound behaves differently underground, absorbed rather than carried. The air in the deeper passages has a quality that is difficult to describe accurately without having experienced it. Not necessarily bad air, not necessarily cold, but still in a way that no outdoor air ever is. A stillness that feels geological, as if the air has been in that particular corridor for a very long time and has no particular interest in moving. There are sections of the Odesa Catacombs that have not been formally entered since the Second World War. Passages on old digger maps that later explorers could not locate, either because the entrance had been sealed or because the tunnel itself had come down. There are accounts of hearing water far below the documented tunnel levels, which would suggest deeper chambers that have never been reached. Some researchers have proposed that the earliest quarrying, done before modern extraction techniques made deep cuts practical, goes further down than anything commonly explored. What is in the parts no one has reached? The honest answer is that no one knows. And that is not a dramatic flourish. It is simply the situation. This is what separates Odessa's underground from most of the famous underground spaces of Europe. The Paris catacombs are vast, but they have been mapped. The layered underground of Rome has been studied exhaustively. The Odessa system has absorbed too many centuries of too many different uses, and it sits beneath a city that has lived through too much turbulence, political, military, economic, to have allowed for the kind of patient, sustained investigation that full understanding would require. What the tunnels tell you if you sit with the idea long enough is that a city is never entirely above ground, that every place humans have inhabited long enough carries another version of itself underneath, shaped by the same pressures, built from the same materials, but darker and quieter and far less willing to give anything up. The famous staircase is still there, descending toward the harbor, drawing visitors who look out over the water. The boulevard trees are still there. The opera house is still there. And below all of it, the corridors run in directions no official map has fully traced, past sealed doorways and water-stained walls, and the cold, quiet evidence of every century this city has moved through. The quarry cuts that produce the buildings above are still open in the dark. The spaces where partisans slept are still there. The smuggler routes and the sealed chambers and the passages that dead-end into questions no one has yet answered, all of it is still there, sitting beneath the ordinary weight of a city that walks over it every day, without pausing to consider what it is walking over. Some corridors are flooded now, some have collapsed inward. Some are exactly as they were 100 years ago, or 200, because nothing has touched them in all that time, and the limestone holds its shape in the dark as long as the dark holds. The city does not know its own basement, not fully, not really. And that, more than the deaths, more than the wartime history, more than the geology quietly failing beneath the streets, is the thing that stays with you. The tunnels are not a mystery waiting to be solved. They are a mystery that the city has simply decided to live on top of, going about its days in the sun while something older and darker and largely unexamined continues running beneath its feet.